Hey everybody, welcome to Open Door Philosophy. I am, it should be something about love. I
Yeah.
am the Cupid of our podcast, Mr. Parsons.
Oh gosh, now you put me on the spot. I am Andrew. Uh, I don't know what. I am the arrow that Cupid shoots.
Oh,
That's so bad. Hey,
that's all right. And welcome to episode 90, everyone. 90. Can you believe it,
that's
Andrew? Episode
wild.
90.
Absolutely wild.
Today we're going to start the beginning of a two-part series on Plato's very well-known and famous Symposium, which is all about love and,
All
the
about
world of
love.
forms.
I love it.
I love it. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
It's going to be
I
great.
I'm so excited to be coming back to ancient Greek philosophy. I have to tell you. So I'm like, if this video goes up, I'm glowing out of excitement. Just kidding.
Yeah, this year we've spent a lot of time swimming in the modern era or
Yeah.
and postmodern.
Which is great. I love that too. But this is a
Yeah,
special place in both of our hearts. So
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
excited to be
Love
back to
Plato.
it.
Mm-hmm. Well, how's it going?
Going good. If I think in last week's episode I said that was the last one I was recording at home. This one is my first one that I'm recording in my new apartment here in law school. So super exciting this week. I've just been setting things up and building things. Nothing too exciting. Next week classes start. Yeah, that's about it with me. How about you?
Doing great. I'm excited that we're now a bi-coastal
That's
podcast.
crazy. We're from coast to
I'll put it
coast.
in
Yeah.
our episode description or
Yeah.
something, our podcast description.
Yeah.
No, everything's great here. First assignments from philosophy class have come in, so I've been grading those this weekend. But in other more exciting news, this morning I was mowing the lawn before
Okay.
potting,
Yeah.
and I saw something brown scamper away, and I was like,
Uh-oh.
"What on earth is that?" And by the way, I live in like the suburbs, so it's one of
Yeah.
those neighborhoods where the house next door to you is 10 yards away, so it's not like I'm on acreage or something. And at first I thought, oh, maybe it's like a baby squirrel or something because it was really small. But then I got closer to it, and it was doing the whole like I'm dead thing. So me, the predator, would not feel like eating it. But it was a baby rabbit,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah, it could like it
Wow.
could have fit in the palm of my hand.
That's
And I'm
super
like,
rare nowadays to find in Houston.
yeah, I'm like, okay. So first of all, how'd this rabbit get here? Two, where's mom?
Yeah.
But anyway, around the corner there is a bit of a green space where electrical wires run through and
Yeah.
important pipes or whatever. And so I've seen some rabbits in that area. Like if I go on a walk early enough in the morning, so I nudged the little guy into a bucket
Oh,
and walked him around the corner to the green space, and hoping those rabbits will take care of the little guy.
yeah.
That
That's
was my
great.
exciting story for today.
That's kind of like a philosophical problems. You run the rabbit over? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, if I was concerned. First of all, I didn't want to touch it because I
Yeah.
don't know if like you get human smell on it, and the
Yeah.
rabbits don't have anything
That's
to do with it.
true.
But the other one is like, is this mother rabbit going to come back to the spot and look for the rabbit? Or,
Oh, that's true.
but geez, it's not a good place to be if you're a rabbit in my front yard. You need to be over in that green space.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
oh, and of course, in other news, another season of Swansea football has begun.
Has it?
That's right. Another glorious
That's
10
funny.
months of football is before me. So we won our second match 3-0. That was very exciting.
That's big. What
That's
are the
good.
what are the odds that the Swans get promoted?
Hmm.
Can they be promoted still? Yeah.
Probably not great.
Okay.
Oh yeah, they can be promoted. They will be at worst a middle standings, middle table team. But
Okay.
we have picked up some pretty exciting. They're young, but some pretty exciting players. Here's the deal, though: all those teams that get relegated from the Premier League, they're loaded, man.
Are
Like they
they?
got bucks and they got good players, and they're pushing to get back. And so, if Swansea will need to be that aggressive in terms of spending and acquiring players in order to compete with the Watfords and the Leeds United of the world.
You need to chip in some dough.
I know, I
No.
know. The owners are American,
Are
so
they?
I'm like, come on, guys.
Yeah. One of them is
Anyway,
secretly you. Uh,
no, I don't have that much money, but that'd be fun. That'd be a minor owner.
I think that you should tell the people. Well, one thing before that, it is very great to get email from people. So
Yeah, yeah.
if it just feels good and it keeps us going. So sometimes it's good to hear. So if you ever want to write in about anything, if you just want to say hi and that's it, please write into the show at contact@opendoorphilosophy.com. We love hearing that, and it keeps us going. And you can give us episode suggestions or whatever. But we just
or
love
whatever.
to hear from you. Love, like this episode is called.
Like this episode, it's
Yeah.
focused on love. No, yeah, it definitely fills the bucket. And yeah, I had a nice email last week from a fellow in Northern England, so that was great. That was
Yeah.
great. Thank you very much for that.
But I think your assignment for your students, your first assignment, was pretty cool exercise that anybody could do or anybody could think about. Could you share that with us real quick? And maybe that's a good
Sure.
at-home exercise.
Yeah. Okay. So I teach a 2 year course. So this was my year one students. They're brand new to me, brand new to philosophy. And I start the year off with giving them a couple of like what I call big questions. Like do we have free will? Those types of big, broad questions that people ask in philosophy. And had them start brainstorming what were some of the big questions that they have. And I called these types of questions keep you up at night questions. These are the questions that it's like, what is the purpose of my life? These types of questions. And so anyway, after they had generated all these questions, a couple days later I compiled all of them and came up with 15 of the questions that they themselves posed, and then gave them back to them and said, pick one, and now defend whatever your view is on that particular question. And so we went through a little exercise of how to structure an argument, and the importance of counter arguments and examples and things like that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was good papers.
Yeah, I think that's just a good exercise for anybody to do if they're interested in it. Just write down some things that bother you and try to think about one or two. Or if you even feel risky, try to write down an answer to it.
Yeah, because here's the deal. Like, we all think we have these answers in our head, but putting them down on paper, whole other thing.
Absolutely.
Like, it gives your thoughts form. Otherwise, they're just rattling around in your head, self-confirming everything.
Yeah, that's right. If you want to share that with us, we'd love to read those.
Oh, send the papers to us. See what they think
Yeah,
to us.
or
Oh, I
even the
see.
questions. Should we just get into it?
Let's
I
just get
think
into it. I
I
would I would
think
love to talk about this dialogue from, well, it's not really a dialogue. Would you call it a dialogue?
there's aspects of a dialogue for sure,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we can
Okay.
call it a
I would
dialogue.
love to talk about this work by Plato from
Yeah.
his middle period. Here we go. Let's talk about the Symposium.
Let's talk about what is a symposium first of all, because this is
Ah,
most
yes.
popularly known as a symposium, Plato's Symposium. What should we talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the title of this work is Symposium, and that's a word
Yep.
some of you are probably familiar with. These, sometimes you'll go to an event and they'll call it a symposium. A symposium on technology or something like that. So that word is still used today, but a symposium in ancient Greece is a little bit different than that. And let me tell you, if some of these academic symposiums today had the same elements as a Greek symposium, well, it'd be a lot more enjoyable.
That's absolutely right.
So what do we do at a symposium, Andrew?
Well, what we would normally do at a symposium is you would have some kind of meal. There would be some flute playing girls in the background, and you would drink a lot, usually, and
What kind of
it,
drink
you
specifically?
would be drinking some wine, the
Yeah,
finest
wine.
some wine,
That's all there was.
and
I wonder if they had beer. They had beer in Egypt and Middle
I don't
East.
know.
Anyway, continue.
Yeah, we need to get a philosopher of the ales or something on here. Uh, but anyways, you would usually sit there, enjoy the music, lay down on some couches, and talk with your friends or listen to music or whatever. And yeah, if you go online, you can find there's a lot of ancient art that depicts these symposiums. I don't want to call them buckets on vases, and there's
Buckets.
frescoes with them. Yeah, and from those times, so you can see what they're like. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me be clear. When I said if these academic symposiums today would do it like the Greeks did, it'd be a lot more enjoyable. I am only referring to lounging and eating good food and drinking good wine.
Yeah.
If you research any of this, I'm not referring to anything else other than that. That is what I
Yeah.
meant. It's
That's a
important to
good.
clarify your
Yeah,
terms in
that's
philosophy.
an important clarification there, because sometimes these could get wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some there's some maybe some of the more light art, because it can get pretty crazy, like people throwing up, slaves attending to these people throwing up, or anyways, you can see some crazy things.
You can figure out. You can figure
Yeah.
out. In fact, at the opening of this particular work,
Yep.
symposium. But basically, they're all sitting around. They're like, "Oh, geez, guys,
Yeah.
we drank way too much
Yeah.
last night."
That's right.
Like they all have hangovers, basically.
Yeah.
They're like,
And
"Let's take it a little easier tonight. Let's talk about philosophy."
yeah.
So
That's awesome, and it's right. And let me provide a point of clarification here too. There's actually two symposiums with Socrates. There's
mhm.
Xenophon Symposium and there's Plato Symposium. Plato Symposium, if you hear the symposium with Socrates, that's the one they're probably talking about. I've never read Xenophon Symposium. Have you?
Me neither.
Yeah, but it exists,
Or
and
Xenophon, always second
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
That's probably true. It's hard to beat Plato. Xenophon
It's hard to
probably has
beat
been.
Plato. Like
Yeah,
it's some stiff competition.
but yeah. So anyway, that's a point of clarification there. So we are
Yeah.
talking about Plato's Symposium today, which is a philosophical work talking about love.
Yeah. Would you say something briefly about where this work falls in his corpus? It's considered part of his middle period. So what's meant by that? And how is it different from, say, when we talked earlier in our episodes about something from Plato's Apology or something, or
Sure.
Socrates' Apology or something?
Yeah, great. So when we talk about Plato's periods of his writing, we usually talk about them in his early, middle, and late period. His early period is usually what scholars, although there's some debate of it, what scholars would say sticks very close to Plato's, Socrates' original philosophy, what Socrates would have actually believed and espoused in Plato, although he might have added some literary style, which he certainly did because he's the author of it. He's probably not espousing too much of his own philosophical views. In the middle period, we see the character of Socrates may still be used. We see more development of Plato in the Plato's own philosophical ideas in those texts. Of course, this is one of these. So there's absolutely some points of Socratic influence there, but Plato's expanding on them, taking them in his own way. I'll give a really good difference between the two, how he can tell the difference in a second. But the later period, these these dialogues I think are less read, I think, by people, but they're certainly all of Plato's independent thoughts. Of course, it shows some influence, but it's probably nothing like what Socrates actually would have believed, or maybe he would have agreed with some parts, but it's purely Plato's own thinking at those points. And sometimes one or two of those dialogues don't even incorporate Socrates in them. How we can tell the difference, because I think in future weeks we might talk about some of Plato's early works like the Apology, or which really depend heavily on Socrates. How we can tell the difference between early and middle works is that Socrates, in his early works, when it's his own voice talking, he never really makes a conclusion at the end of it. When he goes in, he's taking something that someone else brought forward, a view that they thought, and basically he's showing the absurdity or the contradiction in their viewpoints. He's never really espousing a view of his own. That differs in the middle period, where, as we'll see in this dialogue, the character of Socrates is actually putting a viewpoint forward. He's making his own viewpoint on love. So that's a very simple difference between early and middle dialogue. Something that you can look for.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. I've heard that if you are reading anything from Plato's late period, you're probably a Plato scholar, because otherwise it's
There's
not
not too
just nearly
much.
as enjoyable as early and middle, because it gets pretty dense.
No, that's my impression. Excuse me, that's my impression. I think that the one big one that comes off to mind is called the Laws. I believe that's in his late
Mm-hmm.
period, and people will read that who are, I don't know. I don't think I ever touched anything like that in his late in my classes about Plato in my undergraduate year. So yeah, I think that's right. One cool thing that you could do if you're interested in Plato is that Plato actually has some epistles. These are not biblical. Epistles just
Mm-hmm.
means letters that survive. I think these span the period of his life, but that's something cool to look at. You can see Plato's writing, his thoughts outside of these dialogues. We don't want to talk too much about that now, but I just want to point that as something to people if they're interested. They're quite short, maybe a page or a page and a half, or a few pages in the longer cases. But
And further, if you're interested in Plato just as the person, but of course you can't separate his philosophy and his life, from him the person. But anyway, there's a great book that came out last year called Plato of Athens: A Life in Philosophy. It's a biography of Plato. It's by Robin Waterfield. So that'd be a great read if you're interested
yep,
in all things Plato.
yep. I wish we had him back on after that book came out, but I totally
Yeah,
forgot about that. All right, how about we get into this? Let's get into this specific dialogue real quick. I think this is probably, maybe this is too big of a claim. I think this is probably like one of the top, it's definitely in the top five, but maybe in the top three of Plato's most famous philosophical works. Would you agree with that?
yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you got Apology. Everyone reads that.
Yeah. The
Philosophy 101.
Apology, yeah. Um, Republic and
The
Symposium, I would say, were
Republic,
the
yeah, and
big
the
three.
Symposium. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Um,
there's a lot of very familiar ideas in the Symposium that you are probably, or anyone is probably familiar with, just as a common viewpoint about love that's included in this symposium. So it may surprise you as we go through some of this, that some of the viewpoints, in fact, might have even originated from the symposium. So we'll get to that. No spoilers. No
Absolutely.
spoilers.
Absolutely. That's right. This, for a little bit of a context of the opening, as we've mentioned, this takes place a symposium. It's set in a banquet in Athens. It differs from traditional Socratic dialogues, which are told by which might start with Socrates talking or asking a question. This one's not told from the perspective of Socrates. It's actually told by it's told from a later time period. It starts off with two friends talking about this event that one of them had heard from his friend. And so, just as a literary style, that's something to think about. Why does this start off? I mean, Plato certainly could have had this start off at the beginning of the, where the first person gives the first speech. This is
Hmm.
kind of like a movie where they're like, oh yeah, I heard the story of a time when, and then
Hmm.
it flashes back in time. So it's not at that time. What does that do? I think from a literary standpoint, it creates a sense of distance. Maybe we don't trust these events necessarily. They're not gospel. It's kind of mythic. It's like, it's a mythic event that happens. All of these people in this dialogue, or most of them, are like some of the most famous people in Athens at the time, of the most famous comic playwright of the time, and one of the most famous doctors. We'll see one of the most famous generals of the time, Socrates, of course. It's kind of an Easter egg. It's like fan fiction almost of these
It's a
great,
good way to put it. I
yeah,
never
of
thought
these
of that.
great ancient Greek figures.
Yeah, all the heavy hitters are here,
Absolutely.
of this period in Greek history. And yeah, you ask a good question, like why does Plato frame this story this way? And one of the things I've thought about is maybe by these characters, Apollodorus, I think, was the guy's name who's telling the story.
Yep,
It's kind
that's
of like
right.
he's telling the story of a story, right? It's kind of a story within a story,
Yep.
sort of deal. And it might be a way that Plato is attempting to indicate to its readers that what we're getting ready to talk about is really important. because like this event is important enough and was significant enough, meaningful, that other people know about it and they talk about it, right? I'm trying to think what a current sort of situation might example might be. It would be like okay, this is like this is terrible. The Symposium is like the Avengers.
Yeah, that's right.
Each one of these, superheroes, Black Widow and Captain America and whatever, they all have individual lives and individual stories, but hey, they all come together for one big movie, and that's the Avengers. This is terrible. I'm so sorry, everyone. What a bad example. But the Symposium is the Avengers, and so the Avengers story is very important. So you might imagine someone years later saying like, "Hey, man, talking about great battles, right? Hey, man, there's this one time that the so and
Yeah,
so Avengers took on this big bad." You can tell
that's
how
right.
familiar I am with this movie. Maybe it's Loki. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So that's kind of an example of sort of what this is, although not a good one. Sorry.
No, I think that's right. And something stylistic about Plato that he does is he doesn't really put himself in dialogues, but what happens is he'll throw maybe family members of or something in there, and that's what happens in this case. Apollodorus is called by Glaucon, who's Socrates' brother, and presumably that's the sorry, not Socrates' brother, Plato's brother. It's called by Plato's brother, and he's asked, and Plato's brother Glaucon is like, "Hey, Apollodorus, I heard you know what happened at this? What happened? When did it take place?" And so that's how it starts. But Apollodorus, the guy who's telling Glaucon of the story, he doesn't even really know it happened. He heard it from his friend Aristodemus, and Aristodemus is not even a central player in the dialogue. He just
Hmm.
bumps into Socrates on the side of the road, and Socrates invites him there.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. He
Yeah,
invites him to the party, doesn't he? I guess important to I don't know if it's important,
yeah,
but why are we having a party to begin with?
yeah.
And this gets us into like some of the characters. So there's a character in the Symposium named Agathon,
Yep.
and a real person, and he was a playwright, a
He's a
tragedian.
tragic. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote tragedies, and so he had just come off like winning a competition. This was normal in Greece.
Yep.
They would
Every
have
year.
competitions. Yeah, every year for just like you'd think like with the Olympics with wrestling and sprinting and all that sort of stuff. They also had competitions for art and plays. And so he's just coming off this win basically at a competition. So that's why we're all together and partying, right? We're celebrating Agathon.
That's right. And so that's what Socrates is on the way to, and as we're Aristodemus, however you say it, he, like I said, he's walking Socrates. He bumps into Socrates and invites him. Socrates is like, "Oh, I'm on the way to this party. Why don't you come?" He's like, "Okay, I'll come." So they're walking to the place, and Socrates periodically keeps stopping because he's lost in thought. And at a certain point, Aristodemus just leaves him and goes to the party alone. And everybody's like, "Oh, hey, where's Socrates?" So Socrates actually doesn't come into the banquet until much later because he's so preoccupied with ideas. That's just kind of funny, I think.
No, it is funny. It's so one of the fun things about this is that there's a bit of humor in it
Yeah. Oh, there's a
in this
lot.
story,
There's a lot.
and it's kind of funny. I mean, basically, this guy shows up at a party on the invite from Socrates, but Socrates isn't with him. He shows up to this thing and he's like, "Hey guys, so I'm here to party, but Socrates was my invite, but he's not with me."
Yep.
So imagine how that would look. Everyone's
That's
like,
right.
"Well, okay, I guess we'll let him in." But where's Socrates? He's like, "I don't know. I left him like on this plaza or whatever, and he's just staring at the stars. I don't know."
Oh, that's exactly right. And let me quote from this here. They say, so they started eating dinner. Then after a little while, Socrates came, having spent the time in his accustomed way, when they were right in the middle of dinner. So he comes in the middle of dinner and just takes a seat, and it says in his accustomed way. So that's not
Yeah.
normal for Socrates. Anyway, let's should we get into it?
Yeah, let's talk about a couple themes here again before we get into the speeches themselves. By the way, that's how it's structured. So
Yep.
each one of these very special, famous people that are at this party, they're all going to give a speech, They're going to give a speech to love. So we need to talk about exactly what they're talking about here when we talk about love, right?
That's right. There's six people here who are going to give speeches on love, and all six of them, and we'll go over them as they come. But they're all kind of experts in different things. They range from playwrights to doctors and Socrates, of course, and their speeches revolve around their expertise
Mm-hmm.
and take that flavor. Let me say, I believe in the Greek, although I don't have it in front of me, and I probably wouldn't even be able to read it that well if I did. But they are, let me quote, what is this? What is this going to be about? And they say that they are going to make speeches in hymn to the god
Mm-hmm.
Eros, Eros, love, to the god of love, and they all want to give speeches to honor him the best, to give the best speech. So that's the main theme, I think, here.
Yeah, and if you read the work, it is a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with what Eros is,
Yes,
because a lot of the speech givers are they're saying this not about love but to love.
yes,
And when they say love, what they're meaning is the God, right? I give this speech to love. This sounds like, oh, poetic,
yep,
but no, they're like, I give this speech to the God,
that's
Eros.
right.
And, in Roman, Eros would have been something much more familiar to us. That would be the god Cupid.
Let me say this too before
Hmm.
we get into it. I think that a trend that a lot of people have who read this, and it's certainly fine if you do read this, is they'll only read Socrates' speech onwards.
Oh, yeah.
And that's okay. That's all fine and good. But Plato put each of these characters into this dialogue intentionally, and we can talk about why he does that for each of them. But I think to ignore each of their speeches or to boil it down to just Socrates' speech uh, discredits the dialogue. Each of them are
Hmm.
offering different perspectives of love, and maybe not all of them are right, but they can all offer a perspective. And so when I see, I was reading yesterday a summary of this dialogue, and it said something like the purpose of this dialogue is to, in the symposium, love is not just a romantic or sexual attraction, but a fundamental force that compels individuals to seek beauty, truth, and goodness. That's
Mm.
that's that's not right. That's Socrates' speech.
It is, yeah.
Love is presented in many, many different ways. So I encourage you to read this and to think about each of them. The dialogue is certainly not just about Socrates' idea here.
And I guess one more thing to note when we're talking about context for this particular work, when they're talking about love and relationships, it's not only heterosexual, but it's also homosexual,
Yep,
which
that's right.
was a common practice in Greek time. And we won't go into all the specifics of how those relationships work, but if you're reading this for the first time and you're in the second speech and you're like, oh my, what's this person talking about?
Yeah,
the so that's what that it, so it bounces back and forth. Some speech givers are only talking about homosexuality,
that's right.
but a lot of speech givers speak about both hetero and homo.
That's right. They'll there's a quote later in the first speech that I have that says, I know not any greater blessing to a young man who is beginning life than a virtuous lover, or to the lover than a beloved youth. That's, I mean, he's talking about a very common relationship in the day. I forget the Greek term. There's a term for it, but they're talking specifically about the relationship between an older man and a younger man, and that younger man would, I mean, they would be at the age where they would have probably first have gotten their facial hair. That's what the scholarship says. So in the day, that would have been, I think, a little younger than men do today, or a little older. I can't remember. People matured, I think, quicker physically. I'm not talking about, and I'm not endorsing this or anything, but so they were probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 years old, maybe a little older than that.
Okay, well, I think it's time we get into it. So Socrates has wandered his way to the party, and they're like, "Hey, Socrates, thanks for showing up. Let's get going. So now we get into these six speeches. Do we want to talk about like who gives what speech at the outset here, or do we want to just say who they are as we go along? Because I have a list of
Let's,
everything.
yeah, I have a list of the people too. Let's do it as we go. I think that'll be easier to keep up with.
So our first speech is by, wait, it's not Phaedrus, is it? Is Phaedrus first?
Well, so what happens is that what happens? Let me pull my notes back up. Something kind of quirky happens. What happens? I think someone gets hiccups or something like that, don't they?
That's right. I don't know if it's at the outset, but that does happen at
Yeah.
some point.
No, I
Yeah, I
think it
have
is.
Phaedrus down
I
as the
think
first
it.
speaker.
I have
Yeah.
Phaedrus too. Erix Machus. I've heard it both ways. Machus does not sound right, but that's how I'll say it. Erix Maxis, I think, is the guy who he starts talking first in support of the speeches. But I think
Hmm.
Phaedrus does come first from my notes.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
bit of back and forth thing, and they actually have a discussion about what order they're going to go in.
yes, they do.
There was
They
actually
do.
that's actually part of a proper symposium.
Yes.
I can't remember if it's clockwise or counterclockwise, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yes. That's right. And those are all things to consider why you did that. But we're not a literature podcast, so I don't. Let's not cover that today. But anyway, I think the idea is that Socrates will speak last because they think no one will be able to speak better than Socrates, and so that's a reason.
Well, they're probably right.
They probably were, and I think they are. So yeah, let's talk about Phaedrus real quick. Let me say a little quick background on him. As I said, that these speeches really revolve around these characters' personalities. I mean, if you think about ancient Greece at this time, this would have been like a modern, for them, a modern cultural touching point for them. This would be like
Mm-hmm.
having, the last. Not really. I mean, this is a bad analogy, but the last six presidents in a room talking, or something that everyone knew a little bit about, and trying to capture their personality and things. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's important for us to have in mind. Phaedrus was a Athenian aristocrat and who studied with the sophist, known for being a great rhetorician in the demos. He was known to have great reverence for the ancient traditions of the Greeks. And we can really see that in his speech. He loves talking about the god of Eros,
Mm-hmm.
the oldest god, who he
The oldest
says,
god. That's right.
yes, that's right. And so that's important to keep in mind.
And,
It's really
and the god that provides the greatest benefits, if I recall.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And yeah, I think that's the big background on Phaedrus that I have. Anything for
Oh,
you to?
let me throw one more thing in there about background on
Sure.
Phaedrus. There is another dialogue that is named Phaedrus. It's the
That's
same
right.
person.
That's
And
right.
earlier we talked top three. I would say Phaedrus dialogue is top 10.
It's
You
in the
know,
top 10.
of
Yeah.
the of Plato's dialogues. By the way, there's like 30 some odd
Yeah.
dialogues. So Phaedrus, has one speech here, but there again, there's another dialogue. It's quite a long dialogue that
It
features
is.
Phaedrus as the main character.
It is. It is. And well, anyways, good friend of mine just released a good translation of it. But Phaedrus in Greek too means something like light, or something to reveal. So that's at least interesting on that point. If it was if it was a point. Anyways, why don't we get into it?
All right, so he says, "Love is the oldest god and provides the greatest benefits." Well, great, Phaedrus. So, what are these benefits? What are we talking about? So, he says the best loving relationships, place inside of a person a type of guidance toward leading good lives, right?
That's right.
Whether that's family, whether that's the state, it's the polis, whether that's money, and he also talks about like opposite wise shame, right? Um, Acting disgracefully. That love has an impact on this. In other words, we don't want to act shamefully or disgracefully in front of someone that we love, right? In the eyes of that lover, we are made stronger when we are reflected in the eyes of our lover. In other words, lack of a better term, we want to act right in front of our lover. We want to impress our lover. We want to maintain their their love for us. I
That's
don't know
right.
that it's so quite transactional like that, but the funny thing, no, I don't know if it's funny. He talks about an army,
Yep,
right?
this is the most famous part from his speech. This idea of the army. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, no, you can take it.
No, no. Are you sure? I feel
Yeah,
like I cut you off. I'm sorry.
no, 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 not at all.
Well, you can add something if I leave it out. But
Okay.
he's when in his discussion of shame, he says, well, shame is a big motivator for people, which is absolutely right. And um, he says that you know you don't want to be we don't want to be shamed by people, or we don't want to be shameful in the eyes of people that we love. So he says, okay, the greatest army that could exist for a city would be an army of lovers. Of course, these are men who loved each other's, because if they fought side by side, they wouldn't act cowardly. They wouldn't do anything shameful, because it would be so disheartening by them to desert their posts, or to run away, or to surrender, because it would be so shameful and so disheartening in their ideas to look bad in front of someone that they loved, which is such a cool idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's kind of a basic human sort of
Yeah,
observation here,
it
right?
is.
Yeah, outside of talking about armies and all this sort of stuff, like the person that we love, like we want to look good in
Yeah,
front of them,
that's right.
not necessarily physically, but maybe physically.
Yeah,
We don't want to look like a slob. We want to impress them. We want to charm them. We want them to think that like we're the best.
yeah,
And so, Phaedrus is saying like this is how love benefits you. It benefits the person's character,
that's
right?
right.
And you can, we can debate about whether or not, trying to look good in front of your lover is something that can truly shape your character or something like that. But it's the motivator here in this case.
And let me just say too here, in this passage, there's a lot of get a good notes commentary after reading this, because there's references to
Yeah,
Homer, a lot of
lots of
Homer.
references.
There's to the Theogony by Hesiod. There's references to Aeschylus, a very famous tragic playwright. So
Hmm.
he's all talking about situations in these books where Achilles goes on a rage out of seeing his beloved Patroclus die.
Yeah.
Beloved in the sense of friend. There's nothing in the real one about a relationship like that.
Yeah, the one that most people would be familiar with would be Achilles and Patroclus, because that's
Yeah,
from the Iliad, and a lot of people know that. The other is a reference to Orpheus. He's kind of called out as being a coward, like he did not have the courage to die for love. But Achilles and Patroclus, yeah, Patroclus was killed by Hector, if anyone
that's right.
remembers the story, right?
That's right.
And so Achilles goes out to avenge his death, and because of this courage, I mean, when Achilles dies, the gods send him to the Isle of the Blessed when he dies. So he's like a really fantastic character here for Phaedrus to illustrate this point. It's a story that everyone in ancient Greece would know, right? It was,
That's
and
right.
in fact, Achilles is made to look even more courageous because there was a prophecy uh, that Achilles would die if he killed Hector.
Yep.
And so, by going to avenge Patroclus's death by killing Hector, Achilles knows he's giving himself a death sentence.
And that's a discussion at the end of the speech. That I mean, not really. I mean, you strained it out more and perfectly, but that's kind of his point here in Phaedrus's speech. Love, and this is a very complex philosophical point. Love is an actor of motivation, not just
Hmm.
as some kind of motion, but in fact the greatest motivator. It is the greatest motivator for virtue, and that's why Eros is the greatest of the gods, because he inspires individuals to virtue.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, this is a good discussing question I had.
yeah,
I love that notion, and it's even echoed in contemporary philosophy today,
it is.
certainly with Susan Wolf, amongst others.
Yeah,
But, a good question is, because we should question.
yeah.
Does love inspire individuals to valor and virtuous deeds? I mean, it seems that it does. I don't know what the counter argument is, but
Well, let's
Faders
try
is
to.
saying it, and we should ask, like, is this true?
Sure. Let's. I can think of an example where it might not, or it might not at the outsource. Let's think about a man who's beloved. I could think about a situation where a man's beloved is catcalled. That's maybe like the easiest or simplest, or even they cheat on him, and the guy will go berserk and kill, or I don't know. That might be a bit extreme, but I mean, I don't think that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I'm not saying that's what you should do, but I'm sure I could find a news story about that where a guy goes on a rampage and kills someone. Or there's a case in the news that I was looking at recently where a father, and this might be a little different, but a father kills someone who hurt his son. Uh,
Mm,
but it seems like in those situations, the lover is doing something that's not virtuous for love of his beloved.
mm, yeah.
What would
That's
you
a
say
good
about
point.
that?
That's not virtuous. True. Excuse me. I'm also thinking, further examples. We could talk about ends and means.
Yep.
So let's say you are newly dating someone and you
Yep.
want to impress them, and maybe, you're not a person, you're not a bad person, but you're not a person that necessarily volunteers to go do things, often for organizations or something. But your new interest does. And so in the interest of achieving the end of your new friend becoming infatuated with you, you volunteer at the local soup kitchen
Yep.
like 3 weeks in a row. And she's like,
Yep.
wow, because it speaks to what's important to that person's virtues, that
That's
person's
right.
character. And so, while you are doing something good, I think good, uh, volunteering in a soup kitchen. You're
That's right.
not doing it because there's something from within you is like, yes, this is a good thing to do. You're doing it as a means to an end, right?
That's right.
And does that change anything when we're talking about valor and virtue?
That's a great point. And let's leave these questions. Do you want to answer
Let's
these
leave it.
questions?
No, no, I
Let's
don't.
leave them in the air. I think
Let's
we
leave
should leave
them.
them in the air. I think that there's answers to them, but yeah, let's leave them in the air for now,
Yeah.
for people to think about. So the next speech, I've
Uh,
never actually talked about this one before, so I don't know how to pronounce it. Pausanias?
I,
Pausanias?
I always thought of it in terms of like Paul, like the name Paul Pausanias.
Oh, that's
That's how I
definitely what it
pronounce it.
is. That's
But
absolutely what it is.
yeah, so his speech is this is interesting. Like he says, love is not honorable, but only. I mean, okay, love is honorable. Let's put it this way: love is honorable, but only if love is pursued in the proper fashion. Right.
Sure.
So now we get to talking. So maybe if we go back to my example of working at the soup kitchen, volunteering at the soup kitchen to impress your new interest, maybe that's not love pursued in the proper fashion. So he
That's right.
talks about it from like sort of a physical, moral, mental aspect, and then he talks a bit about what he calls heavenly love,
Yep.
and that heavenly love is reserved for older youths because they've developed a capacity for reason and virtue. I think this is an interesting talking point.
Yep.
In other words, let's say you guys should go to high school. Wait, there's a freshman, a 14-year-old, and he thinks he's in love, and all that good stuff. But then you take like a 35-year-old or something, and this person is older, they're mature, they've gone through a number of relationships, and that type of love might be, for lack of a better term, I really need to like flesh this term out, but their love is deeper. Like they understand it better. They have a greater capacity. And Pausanias points out reason and virtue is the reason that they would have this deeper capacity for love. But like, what do you think about that, Andrew? Like, is our 14-year-olds love any lesser because they're not older and they haven't developed this capacity that Pausanias talks about?
It's a good point that you bring up, and I think that it doesn't even have to be you know a young boy who hasn't developed the reason. I think what is going on here is that I've seen this commonly love versus heavenly love. There's
Mm-hmm.
a cooler translation that's I think it's of, if I can remember it, although this could be wrong, is vulgar love and heavenly
Mm,
love.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is this vulgar love? Well, it's love that's based out of, to use your example, out of a mean. It's a means of getting something. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what they bring up here, certainly there's like some like non-reasoned, position here, but also of sex driving, that
Sure.
love, and he talks about that. Um, and he has this funny point here. What does it say? Yeah, so this is for people who want to look at this at home. 181b, where he's talking about uh, this vulgar love. First, such men love women no less than boys. Next, they love their bodies rather than their souls again. They love the stupidest they can find, looking only to the act, careless of whether or not it was done beautifully. And then if we skip a little down, this is what you're talking about. But the
Mm-hmm.
eros of the heaven first does not partake of the female, but only of the male. It is the eros for boys, and next is the
Mm-hmm.
elder, without share of outrage or wantonness. This is why those inspired by this eros turn to the male, delighting in what is by nature stronger and more possessed by intelligence. And there's this is a little bit misogynistic, probably. I mean, definitely. But the point here that you're making and is made here is that true heavenly love, it's not focused as much on the physical. It's focused on more of the ethereal, the intellect, things that can come from reasoning, having fun conversations and these sorts of things. And that's why I think he's talking about of the 14 of you saying this 14-year-old boy here. Is it that just because their reason hasn't developed? Sure, yeah, that's right. But
Mm-hmm.
why is that the case? Well, you can't enter into this super complex relationship in which virtue can be built, really.
Yeah.
um,
So some of this is also a bit of a precursor to what Socrates is going to talk about.
yep,
And
that's absolutely right.
if you think about Plato's overall sort of conception of human nature and the tripartite soul that he talks about in other places, sexual urges is the lowest, or any type of urge, like animalistic urge.
Yes,
So whether that's eating food or having sex or whatever, these are the lowest forms of intelligence, right? Or he just simply calls them urges. And the highest form, of course, is reason, and reason allows us to attain virtue. So no surprise, he's kind of dogging on this. I don't mean to suggest that he's wrong. I think he's probably right. But yeah, Pausanias here, he's suggesting here that the value of love depends on the lover's virtue and the beloved's ability to develop this virtue. So a lot of stuff here that honestly Socrates is going to flesh out further for us.
and let me just end this off by saying, how do you say his name? Pausanias?
I say Pausanias, like Paul.
Pausanias.
Pausanias.
Pausanias is Agathon, the main host's lover.
Oh, that's
That's
right.
what's thought. Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. These are two, like, Pausanias. I think he's illegal, some kind of involved with the laws or something, and so that's something to keep in mind. And he's in this relationship with Agathon. So both of them are kind of probably more intellectual people.
Yeah, and you mentioned the law. Well, first of all, okay, so let me back up to something I wanted to say just about the work as a whole. This work, depending on the book size and all that sort of stuff, is about 50 pages, right? This dialogue's
Yep,
about 50 pages or so. There's a lot of depth in all of this. You can read it multiple times and get new insights, new things about it. Some of these, like we were talking about the relationships between the people, and like maybe some of the background, like we're talking about Achilles and
that's
Patroclus,
right.
some Greek. There's just a lot there that you can really dive into if you want to, other than just reading it for a quick sort of opinion about love.
Yep.
But the other thing, you mentioned legal. Pausanias does discuss like the legal and moral aspects of
Yes,
relationships
he does.
in his speech. It's not like a feature of it necessarily,
No.
but he does talk about kind of this intersection of law and morality and love and the nature of it. Right, it kind of has something to do with the nature of love as well, how that should be expressed legally. So yeah, that's an interesting take.
Yes. He talks about the different city states in in Greece, like I think the relationship to homosexuality.
Hmm.
Should we let's Eric's Should
Yeah,
we
let's
hit
get our
this one
last guy
today?
in.
Yeah, and then so let me give a little bit of let's talk about this interlude real quick that happens at 185C for people who are following along at home. So Aristophanes is supposed to come up next, but he has hiccups.
That's so silly.
And he has, yeah, it is, and he
It's
has
funny.
hiccups so bad that he actually, he's hiccuping all the time, like he's hiccuping so much that he can't speak. And so while that's his order, there's a famous doctor there, and so Aristophanes says, Erechmachus, you must either stop my hiccups or speak for me until I can stop them on my own. And so it says, okay, well, I'll show you how to get rid of them, and I'll speak first. He says, and this is just funny, I think. He says,
Oh, it is
if
funny.
you hold your breath for a long time, the hiccups will stop. If not, gargle with water. But perhaps if they're very strong, get something to tickle your nose and sneeze. If you do this once or twice, even if they're very strong, they'll stop.
And kind of one of the things about this character is he is presented as being a bit arrogant and sort of
Yeah,
pompous and
absolutely.
pretentious.
No
And
different
so
from the
this advice
doctors
about
now. No.
hiccups,
Yeah.
yeah, this advice about hiccups kind of is part of
It's so
that, you know.
funny. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, and
Yeah.
that's a great point. That's his character. He's kind of a know-it-all in a
Hmm.
sense.
Yeah. So in his speech, he kind of makes. I think it's one of the shorter speeches. I could be
It
wrong.
is. It is.
He kind of makes two principal points, right? And tries to connect them with all kinds of different areas of study, which is some of his pompousness coming out. But one is that love is right when it, or good. Love is right when it gratifies those who are moderate, but wrong when it gratifies the self indulgent, which is funny that he's the one who's saying.
Yeah.
So, we can talk about virtue in this case, moderation versus self indulgence. And then the other point that he makes is that that love, that love reconciles conflicting elements. And gosh, I'm trying to remember, Andrew, when he says elements, is he talking about, because he's a science guy,
It's about everything in the universe. So
everything in the universe? That's
elements
right.
are like hot and cold, black and white. Yeah, everything. Everything.
Yeah. So love reconciles these dichotomies, these opposites, these conflicting elements, as he calls them. And he talks a little bit about love beyond human relationships, which is interesting. But anyway, those are kind of if we're gonna do little bullet points, those are his bullet points from his speech.
I think the big talking point of his speech, I think it's meant to be a little like, oh, this guy's, you know, this guy is talking about all of these science topics and is kind of a
Hmm.
jerk. And in the background, you can just imagine Aristophanes, who they'll say in the next speech, he was like doing all of the things that he told him, and finally was tickled by his nose. So you can imagine all of that going on in the background, like, everybody's probably not paying attention. But the big thing here is that what I think is that uh,
Hmm.
is exactly what you said. It's this dichotomy between things. That's what love is. Love is order. Love is a thing that
Hmm.
reconciles two opposites from each other. I
Hmm.
think he says that somewhere. And what's the big point here, which Plato and Socrates both love, and we'll talk about, is this concept in Greek called sophrosone, which means temperance, moderation, order,
Hmm.
order of things. And when one in soft persona, one its character is aligned. They're sound in mind and spirit, and they're in balance with each other. That's probably a better way to put it. And and so that's a kind of virtue too. So we've seen two virtues crop up
Hmm.
here so far. So it's some kind of order, and that's what he talks about. And that's the big point that he talks about here. Let me read a quote if I can find it really quickly. This is 188D. Eros is fulfilled in good things, accompanied by temperance and justice, both among us and the gods. that has the greatest power and provides all happiness to us, enables us to associate with each other and be friends, even with the gods who are stronger than we are. So love enables us to become ordered. Love enables us to become, it's a state in which we are not driven by our passions. It's a state where we're not, going crazy and being tricked and deceived and, interested in other things. No, it's a state of mind that we're brought into to be excellent in our mind, to be well ordered.
What's interesting here to me about this too is when we're talking about the universe, elements, all that good stuff, and love bringing order to that. I don't think it's a terribly uncommon idea today that love is a type of force that brings balance and harmony, whether we're talking about the elements or whether we're talking about human beings. This idea of it kind of being a force is interesting. It's easy for the Greeks because there was a god that they
Yeah,
could associate that with. Um, but yeah, I think this is a very modern take, actually. That love is
yeah,
something that brings balance, right? It brings harmony, or it brings opposing things into harmony. We talk about the lovely political election season that we're in. Some people will say like, "Oh my gosh, America has never been more divided," or whatever. Well, what can fix all that? Aramachus says, "Hey, y'all just need to love each other, and this division would solve itself."
all right. I guess this is where we should probably cut it for today.
Yeah,
We did some background here, but next episode we'll cover the rest of the speeches, or should we? Yeah, I think that would probably be best. What do you think?
yeah. So everyone, JK. At the beginning, I said 2 episodes. We've decided this will be 3 on the fly. This is how it works sometimes. I guess that's it for today.
I think so. Let us know if you loved the episode.
Yeah, please let us know if you loved the episode in whatever way you love it.
Yeah, you can send a letter.
Yeah, but anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in today. We love that you did.
We love it. Yeah, we would love if you go to our whatever page you're listening to this, give us a 5-star review, leave a review there. If we'd love for you to subscribe. If you're on YouTube, we'd love to see that. We'd love for you to write us at contact@opendoorphilosophy.com. We'd love it if you'd have a great day. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to plug.
Let's see. We
Instagram?
love that. We love that. Oh, yes, Instagram. You can always find us on the Instagram as well. And we love that Kevin MacLeod allows us to use his music for free. Thanks so much, buddy. And I think that's it.
I think that's all.
Well, if your life is ever in need of some philosophy, remember, guys, the door is always open. See you later.
Peace.